Oh, hello, everybody. Welcome to another Good Tips for Hard Times, where we find smart people who have great advice to help you get through your days. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Anita Sarkeesian. I'm a media critic, public speaker, and the executive director of the Games and Online Harassment Hotline, which is a new emotional support resource for people who make and play games. And guess what? If you were here last week, you know, but we are launching on Monday. The hotline is going to be open. We're so excited. We've been working really hard to get that going. So we will be open Monday through Friday from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. Pacific. And you can find out more at gameshotline.org. And you can help us spread the word if you follow us on our social media, which is Games Hotline across all of the things. And you can retweet, reshare, all of that good stuff. So we would really appreciate your support in getting the word out to your communities. All right, I am actually really excited for this week's episode. Last week, we talked about how to run tabletop RPGs and what that looks like digitally and in isolation times. And so this week, we're going to focus more on the safety aspect of that, which I think is something a lot of our community cares about. So we have two folks today to talk to us about this. The first is Lauren Bryant-Monk, who is dedicated to making the tabletop industry safer, more diverse, and full of smooches. She is a game designer, safety editor, and the co-creator of the TTRPG Safety Toolkit. Lauren's also an actual play streamer with a particular interest in solo TTRPGs. I want to hear more about that. And streams long play anthology campaigns of solo games on her own channel, Starving Soubrette. And then we also have Kienna Shaw, who is a tabletop RPG designer, writer, and streamer. They freelance self-published games, which can be found on itch.io, for those who don't know what that means, and is one of the co-creators of the TTRPG Safety Toolkit as well. They have appeared in weekly live streams as the co-producer of Salty Sweet Games. Hello, everyone. How are you doing?
Good.
I had they and she in your bio. If you have a preference, please let me know.
I am open to either one at
Great.
any given point, interchangeable.
Great. That's
It works.
perfect. Thank you both for joining us today. I'm really excited to have you.
Yeah, it's super exciting to be here.
Yeah. Well, so let's start like super basics. And this might not be super basics, but like, what does it mean when you talk about safety in tabletop RPG? Like, what does that even mean?
Well,
yeah, I'll take this. So, because when you're playing tabletop RPGs, you are telling a story with usually at least one other person, but you're telling a story that you don't know what's going to happen. And because we don't know what's going to happen, sometimes accidentally things that we would rather not happen will come up in the narrative. And it is good and important to have conversations with the people that you're playing with or with yourself to kind of figure out how we can avoid these things happening in the first place, but also what to do when they happen, and how we can prevent further harm if harm has been caused, or to kind of redirect.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So before we get into some of the specifics around like how do we do that and what that looks like, I'd love to know a little bit more about maybe the history of like why you felt like it was important to create this. Do people in the community, like, are they receptive? Do they care about safety? You know, how this came to be.
yeah, I can take this one kind of as the historian of the two of us in terms of this. So safety in gaming has been a conversation for a very long time. We can trace a lot of it back to forums and websites and blog posts and in-game discussions, at least a couple decades by this point. And so we've always had this conversation about, trying to keep each other comfortable with what's going on in a game, but it's always been kind of lost to the annals of time, we always believe that, the internet is forever, and in many ways it is, but the way that we archive things is not forever, and the way that we access that knowledge is not forever. And so for me personally, what ended up happening is that a couple years ago, I was in a podcast, and we ended up talking about safety tools. And it's the first time I had ever heard about the concept of safety in gaming. I mean, it was always in the back of my head of like, yes, I'd like the people I'm playing with to have fun and not feel like they're uncomfortable or having a bad time. But I never had the concept of systemizing it or as a, actual thing to do as part of the game process itself. And I was fascinated with it, and I started looking into it, and I realized that so many of these resources, which I was like, why had I never heard of them? I was like, oh, because they got, that forum got shut down, or that website's gone now, or hey, you can't access this blog post anymore. Yeah. And so it became this project of mine, again, about 2 years ago, where I was like, okay, how do I make this easy for me to use as at the time, mostly just doing tabletop streaming. And so I created a very first guide that was called the Quick Reference Guide of Safety Tools for Streaming. And that was all, it was like a 2-page thing that was mostly just for me and my friends to kind of go, oh, here's like some stuff we can put into our games to understand what safety tools are and the safety in gaming and how to use it. And it kind of blew up. And it extended really far, and I started getting suggestions for, oh, you should have these tools in here. You should have these discussions as part of it. And I quickly realized this was becoming a much bigger thing than just this one little one-off product I made. And so basically, I ended up kind of talking to Lauren about it because she wanted to do at a local convention, do a panel about safety in gaming, and ended up creating the TTRPG Toolkit, Safety Toolkit, as a process of it, because we were just like, well, we want something physical for our attendants to have and to reference. So we made it, and then that blew up as well. The reception of safety has always been in contention. There are many, many people who are very for it, and a lot of people who are against it. For many reasons of calling it censorship or babying or how dare you take away this stuff from me that I like to use in my games. And
yeah, so this clearly goes across different types of gaming spaces, because we hear a lot of that, like just in online spaces. So how do you address those concerns of like, this is censorship, or how dare you control my art, or all the other sort of nonsense arguments that get lobbed at folks who are trying to create safer spaces?
Well, I mean, we have different ways of dealing with it, and it depends on what level of those types of things are being leveled at us. Obviously, harassment has happened. And that type of stuff, you kind of just have to block, move on. There's really no level of getting through to that. And it's safety, our personal safety over that. But in terms of actually addressing, the concerns of, oh, but this feels like it's going to take away something from me. It's understanding that, one, you can't play a game unless you're all on the same page as to what's acceptable or not. That goes like on all levels of a tabletop RPG social contract, in a sense, right? So you have a social contract of like, you're the GM and I'm the player, and this is what we do with that. Or, it even goes down to it's my turn to bring the snacks for the table. There's a social contract there, and safety is just another part of that. It's a social contract of, I want us to have fun and to enjoy what's going on. And so me caring for your boundaries is a part of that. So that's one part. And the other part is that safety and establishing boundaries and respecting them is not a restrictive thing. Yes, it does block off potentially some topics. But what that does mean is that it gives you freedom to go explore other things. One of my favorite ways of kind of looking at this is like bungee jumping. Because you can still have the thrill of the situation, of the risks, but you have a safety harness and you've got a cord to keep you from actually facing any true danger that could hurt you outside of the consensual fun that you have decided to engage in.
Yeah. Lauren, did you want to add to that?
Yeah. I think it's people get sometime. Yeah. Okay. So usually when people kind of say, why are you taking this away from my story? It means that they have like a very specific idea of where they want to go, and they have like a very specific plan of what they want to do. And if this is a GM, because a lot of times this will come from GMs saying like, why won't you let me traumatize my players by, using all the things they're afraid of against, is that like, just go write a book. You're, we are playing a game together, and so we all have to be okay with everything that's happening at the table. And because sometimes you're not playing with your best friends, or sometimes you're playing with people you've met for the first time, like at a convention, or sometimes you're playing with like your significant other's friends that they're really comfortable with, but you've only met them like once or twice at a party, and now you're hanging out with them every week, and you like, don't necessarily feel comfortable saying like, hey, I'm not cool with this. Safety tools are these kinds of systems that are available to help facilitate difficult conversations when the act of like just having a conversation, which is one of the more well-intentioned detractions that we get from this, is just talk to, just have a conversation with your players. And sometimes that's like a lot more difficult than you can just say.
Yeah, humans are not made for confrontation. We don't like that, and we don't like disrupting the status quo, and trying to reinforce your boundaries is a confrontational, disruptive of status quo thing. And so the same way that, well, I'm going to use a lot of analogies in this talk. I'm sorry, everybody. The same way that in sports, we have a system for when somebody does breaks a rule or somebody gets hurt. There's just easy ways that everybody knows what's going on and understands what exactly to do in response. So, if a player gets hurt, somebody throws up a red card, everything stops. We go and address and make sure that this person's okay. If they're okay, then we can continue play. If not, we pull them off, we replace them, and the person who hurt them, if there is a person, we deal with them, we put them on the bench. So there's this whole system to it, and we already understand that for other forms of media in all sorts of ways. Look at movies, or where there's a content warning, so you know exactly what you're getting yourself into, and you consent to, yes, this has a lot of gore and like violence. I am buying into that. Same sense here. You buy into a specific experience where you don't know exactly what's going to go and happen, but you're cool with what's going on, and you have a way to stop or pause or change things if you need to, without feeling like you have to be confrontational about it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I love the analogies, so please keep them coming. And chat is also a big fan of them. I think it really helps us understand clearly how it helps us understand what you're talking about in terms of safety. So I'm getting the sense that when we talk about safety tools in this space, it's not just for worst case scenarios, although that is a part of it, right? Of how to have these difficult conversations when these things come up, but it's also preemptive, like in terms of like building consent ahead of time, maybe like adding conversations about what kind of game we're playing and what is or isn't acceptable in a particular space.
Yeah. When we talk about safety tools, the way that we have kind of split it up in the reference guide in the safety toolkit is in kind of 3 phases of play. There are tools that you use before play happens. There are tools that you use during play, and then there are tools that you use after play. The before play starts tools are focused on what do we want to see, what don't we want to see, and what are we okay with mentioning but not necessarily role playing out. And then that's something that people know ahead of time to avoid. Mid-play tools are for when things you can't predict happen. Sometimes, you don't expect something to show up, or sometimes something can bother you and you weren't expecting it to bother you. But for whatever reason that day, you just can't do it. My favorite example is one time I was playing a game and the GM was going to give us a dog, and we were all excited about getting a pet dog. But as introducing this dog to us, it became clear that the way he was originally going to tell the story was that the dog's previous owner had died, and the dog was sad about that. And I was having a bad day, and I was like, I don't want this dog to be sad. Like, that's just going to make me cry, and I'm not going to have a fun time. So I said, hey, stop. Can we just make this a stray dog? So it's a happy dog who's super happy to be here and want to be our new friends. And then that was fine. And I couldn't necessarily have predicted that ahead of time, like, hey, no sad dogs, because I didn't know we were going to get a pet dog at the beginning of the session. And then after play, these are tools to kind of decompress after what has happened, especially when you're playing games that have to do with like a lot of emotional subjects or a lot of violence. It can be kind of hard to exit from that game space back into the real world. So talking about what was going on, and say, like, how did we feel about this? What was good? What didn't work? What should we think about next time? And kind of reviewing everything that happened so that we can go back into regular non-gaming life without feeling too burdened by the things that happened in game.
Yeah, it sounds like how to have healthy communication in relationships.
Yeah.
It sounds like kind of basic stuff that we are not taught when we're growing up, right? That I'm like, oh, this is how you talk to loved ones and people in your life, and consent and all of that, right?
Yeah, it's just their fancy ways to set boundaries and enforce boundaries with the people you're playing games with.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. Well, would you mind sharing some examples of things that like people can start doing right now, or like sort of the like quick start guide of how to be safer in tabletop RPGs? And obviously we are linking in the chat to the safety toolkit, which I highly recommend folks check out. But like, how do you start if this is a new concept?
So that's a fun question that we always get in terms of how do you start being safer. So there's a whole part of safety that we like to talk about that isn't safety tools, and that people kind of forget that safety isn't just using a tool. What we have to understand is that all safety and consent stuff comes down to a culture of care. In which we all agree as part of our social contract when we're playing a game with people that no matter what happens at the table, the players, everyone who's actually playing, the human beings that are there, come before it. So their emotions, their feelings, their well-being has to come before everything else. And that's really the core tenet of safety and consent in gaming, right? Is that we understand these as fellow human beings that we want to care for because we care for them as people, and maybe as friends or loved ones. And so we're going to do stuff to make sure that we can care for them. And that's basically the overarching thing. It is the most difficult thing because we do not have a culture of care in gaming or in society in general, where we're taught to not really care about other people. But that needs to come first and foremost. And then everything kind of falls into place, where safety tools are a really useful way for people to help establish those boundaries and, again, systemize a very difficult conversation about these types of things. But even just in general, some people are like, well, I don't really see a need for these safety tools. Like, cool, that's totally fine, as long as you're enforcing this culture of care somehow at your table, whether that's just, making sure to check in with people, or like, being open and being understanding of yourself and your own like responses to possible confrontation, or possible screw ups when you're like, oh shit, I've hurt somebody. You need to know how to deal with that. On a personal level and on an interpersonal level, right? Do you immediately center yourself in that feeling, or do you try to work it through and like actually reach out to the other person? So there needs to be all these different levels of just a very metaphysical, emotional aspect of it. That's really the starting point. Is that like the game is not sacred and the story is not sacred. Because they're things that y'all are making up in your heads and sharing a cool imaginary play space with, right? But none of that can happen without the people at the table. And none of that can happen with the people at the table not having a good time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, that's really the starting point.
Are you finding a difference in using these safety tools, having these conversations, acknowledging these particular issues, from moving from in-person gaming to online or digital spaces?
Yes and no. Kienna and I think mostly play in digital spaces. It's funny that there was a subset of people when we all kind of had to start staying at home. A lot of people in tabletop gaming were like, this is what I do already. I already know about Zoom backgrounds. I'm cooler than all of you know. But there are some tools that are more difficult to use in digital spaces. For example, in the toolkit, there's one that mentions the support flower, which is kind of a flower you place on the table, and it has different colors. And the way you use it is you make eye contact with another person that you want to check in on, and they touch a place on the flower that indicates their level of comfort with what's happening. That's a lot harder in a digital play space. But there are other tools that translate really well. For example, probably the most ubiquitous tool is the X card, which is a mid-play tool that we use to just remove content, no questions asked from from the narrative. And that is very easy to use in a digital space because the existence of chat happens. And so you can just put an X in chat, and it can in some ways be even more comfortable for people to use because a lot of video conferencing tools have private chat options. So if you want to X something, but you're not comfortable telling the whole party you're Xing it, you can anonymously use that X card with just the GM or with whoever is introducing the content that you want to remove. And then they can just say, oh, somebody played an X card, we're going to remove that. And that takes kind of the pressure of I'm the one ruining this person's fun. So there's a real benefit to using that tool in some cases online.
Nice.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too is that we have to understand that a lot of so going back to the just talk to each other thing, we as humans use a lot of psychological and physical indicators to tell if we think somebody's uncomfortable or not cool with something. Those are faulty. Because somebody can smile through something as a defense mechanism to not feeling safe in an environment, but we generally use like someone's body language or someone's voice, or they're not looking at me, or they're they're withdrawn into themselves or something else to say that something's wrong, and that is much harder to pick up on in a digital space. And so it just becomes even more important to, find a way to regularly check in and find other indicators that aren't just, again, still faulty human detection of body language or the such to inform that type of stuff. And especially when you're moving away from voice and video, because there's a lot of TTRPG stuff that happens in play-by-post, which is all just text-based. It's not face-to-face in any sense, or just using a voice call where you can't see the other person, you don't have the indication of their face. And even in a video call like this, I can't tell who's looking at who. I can't tell, what the expressions are. I'm just seeing this part of your body. That's not really helpful in an overall sense of making sure everyone's comfortable. So explicit consent is always important, even more important when we shift to digital spaces. And you honestly should be just continuing that line of thinking to in-person spaces as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We have a question in chat that I want to bring up. DataFran asks, what are some ways to roll these concepts out to a group without making it feel like all conflict or hardship within the story will be sanded down?
Well, I think it's the understanding that what conflicts you want to have and want to go gritty into, you can totally do that, right? And what the safety and consent does is that everyone consents to this being gritty, or this being difficult, or this being a hardship. I see a lot of people being like, oh, but like, what if people want to X card them losing? And then they just never lose. And I'm like, well, that makes a really boring story. But if that's the story they want to tell, cool. And if that's the story that everyone wants to tell, cool. That's fine. But most of the time, you're going to have at least some agreement as to what type of conflict you do want to delve into. And again, by establishing, hey, you know what? Like, there's some conflict stuff that I want to not have. Like, I don't want homophobia in this game. That's one of my personal things that usually I put in. I just don't want to deal with the type of stuff that I deal with in real life to be dealt with in game. And so I go, we're removing that. But again, by me saying explicitly what I don't want, we know exactly what we can explore and what we can get deep into, and know that if we do go too far, we have a way to step back. And often people are actually more willing to dive deeper when they know that they have the option to opt out. Same way that, again, like I said, bungee cord jumping, right? Like you consent to that thrill of, oh God, like I'm gonna fall from this bridge. But like, again, you have something that can hold you back from actually being fully harmed. So I mean, like, honestly, from my own experiences, it's never been a dulling tool to have that. I've most of these games I play right now are actually horror games. I play Bluebeard Bride and all of that, which is incredibly intense and goes deeply into, I am here as a groundskeeper, I am here to try to get you and try to pull you apart and break your character mentally and psychologically and physically. That's my goal here.
That sounds terrifying.
But if I know what you're not okay with, and I know that you are okay with saying no to things, then I can just go really deep. Like if someone says, you know what, I don't really want to have I don't want to have any children hurt, or I don't want to have any animals hurt. Like, cool. All right, let's just pull out the body horror then, and we're gonna have all these like weird, creepy skin suits here or whatever, and that's totally fine. So yeah, I really don't think it's that much of a concern. And to be like, oh, we're dulling down the teeth or something. It's like, no, you're dulling down a couple of them, but you're sharpening others, and people are going to be okay with being stabbed by those knives that you have consented to.
From a practical standpoint, I think a really good way to frame this is to ask people, okay, what don't you want to see, but also what do you want to see? So if you don't like spiders, what other bugs do you feel okay about? Or like, if you don't like, something else, like what are things that we don't like? What are tropes we want to avoid, things that are not fun? But what do we find fun in this particular genre? So, maybe we don't want to have 3-hour-long combat, but like, I want to have a fancy dress ball because I want my character to dress up at a party and like cause shenanigans. And then you're letting the whole table kind of craft exactly what kind of experience they want to see that isn't just dependent on what are we taking away. It's what are we adding to.
Does this fall on the GM? Like, is there just because everyone contributes, right? But if we're establishing all of these like parameters, is it on the GM to determine like what the story then is and what the space is?
Again, it's all super dependent on the social contract of your table. But generally speaking, it should not all just be on the GM, because the GM is just another player at the table, another participant. And it's really everybody's responsibility to care for each other, right? You can't just designate one person as your group therapist to work this out unless you're literally hiring them to be your therapist, and then why are you playing games with them? That doesn't make any sense. And so the whole idea then is everyone participates in this care culture, and whatever that means. The GM often can help, set the guidelines of, hey, this is the kind of story that this game can tell. And this is the kind of story that I was thinking of kind of guiding you through. And of course, it all depends on what level power a GM has within a narrative and within the system. And on the rest of the players have to buy into that and have to go, okay, and then here's how I'm going to help. Here's how I'm going to do stuff. There's this really great tool that's called the buddy system that we have within the toolkit, which is all about looking out for each other at points of conflict when somebody is uncomfortable, but is uncomfortable saying that they're not okay with something. So if anonymity is not really doing it for them, in terms of, I'm going to private chat, private message the GM or whoever is bringing up the content. Having the buddy system means, I can play the X card, but I'm going to tell Lauren, and she can speak it out for me because she will be my advocate for it. She won't say my name, but I know that she will speak for me, and because she has my care in mind. And so we have to kind of extend that out to the entire table, where everyone takes that responsibility to care for each other, check in with each other, respect each other's boundaries. And you can be the one to bring up like, hey, are we doing okay? Like, it doesn't have to be all on the GM to be like, are you cool with what's going on? Because everyone's contributing content to what's going on. And so therefore everyone should have that responsibility and that care for everybody.
Yeah, especially because games that have a focused GM usually put a lot of weight on and a lot more responsibility on what the GM is doing. They usually have to like come up with a story or stat out monsters, or just any variety of GM tasks. Make sure everybody's spotlighted properly. And if you put also everybody's comfort and safety and happiness on that as well, like solely on the GM, they're gonna drop a ball because it's just too much. And oftentimes I find that sometimes GMs are the one whose safety gets most ignored in those situations because they are so invested in making sure that everybody else at the table has a really good experience that you're more likely to kind of step aside if you're really not okay with something, but you want to follow with the principle of yes and, or whatever kind of fallacies of GMing that exist. So like as players, you should be looking out for each other, but you should also be looking out for your GM, because your GM is a person with emotions, and even if they may like be playing God in your narrative, they are not actually God. And while they may be antagonistic to you in the story, you shouldn't be antagonistic to them in real life.
Yeah. I want to bring in a question from chat again. Makor says, this was posted when you were talking earlier, but about role creep. They're wondering if someone volunteers too many alternatives or proposals, how does a GM respectfully maintain steering of the narrative?
Well, I mean, usually, again, in a game with a GM, there is often a social contract where the GM has a final say on things. Um, but obviously with that leveraging of the bringing suggestions from other players, or they're incorporating what other people are saying, or if somebody really has a hard line about something, they will respect that. Um, and it's basically again, it's just talking to your players and looking at the system and the game you're playing and your table and going, okay, so what exactly is this contract? And many of these tools actually do have like ways of kind of like looking through that. And for example, the X card, it's basically just a card which is developed by John Stropoulos, which is if something happens in game and you do not want that to happen, like you don't want that to be a thing, you exit. In which case, everyone kind of stops and you go, okay, we're going to retcon whatever just happened, and we'll move forward with a new route. And in that case, usually it's just the GM goes, okay, or whoever was bringing up the content goes, okay, like that's not happening anymore. I'm just going to come up with a new route. And again, it's useful to know boundaries ahead of time. If everyone had that discussion and put it into a document of what are my soft boundaries, what are my hard boundaries on stuff, then they know, okay, so we're not going to touch any of those, and I'm just going to route it somewhere else. And if there is that feeling of, the GM has too many suggestions or too many things, then it comes down to having a conversation again, being like, okay, so how do you want me to, when this stuff happens, how do you want me to deal with it? The Luxon technique is really cool in this one, where it basically, if something happens that makes a player uncomfortable or they're not cool or triggers them, then the narrative control is placed onto them to deal with how it goes. It's not the GM thing, it's not the person who brought it up. It's the fight goes to the person who is uncomfortable with what's going on, and then they can dictate what's going on. So for example, I have a squick about eye injuries. I really don't like gory details about people's eyes being hurt. It grosses me out. I don't like it. And so basically what ends up happening is that if we're using the Luxon technique at the table, if we get to a point where an NPC does get their eye hurt, then the narrative control goes over to me, and I go, you know what, we're going to keep it in, that's okay, but we're just going to say they bandaged it up and they're fine, and they're just going to go over there now, and we're not going to deal with it anymore. So yeah, it's just, again, having that conversation, or there's tools that are right for you to figure out what level of narrative control you want to give to people, and then who's going to be the one to resolve all of it. Often it's the GM, but it can be other people.
Yeah, Kienna brings up a really good point, bringing up the Luxon technique specifically versus the X card. The Luxon technique kind of came into the consciousness. I mean, it was being used by Luxon, but it came into the consciousness when people were talking about the issues with the X card. For some people, that it can, even though it's meant to be a safety tool, it's meant to, make people feel safe, it can actually initiate a trauma response in some people who feel that pretending the traumatic event never happened makes things worse. And so when you're looking at support tools and you're looking at safety tools, it's a good conversation to have with everybody to and to continue to have with everybody, especially if you're a table that's not used to support tools, to say, okay, is this going to work? Like, I would like to use the X card because that is what I'm most comfortable with. Are you okay with using the X card and with what the X card means? And I think that's really important. And I think, and this is a personal opinion, but I think we should be shifting away from giving the GM too much power and too much narrative control. And that if somebody is making a lot of proposals, then that's a sign that they're not enjoying the story that's being told, and so we need to look at other ways for the story to be told that everybody enjoys.
Yeah.
Did you want to add to that?
Just a little to spin it out a bit. I think that then all goes into safety and consent and support at a table is not a one-size-fits-all thing. Um, the TTRPG Toolkit came from the fact that there are so many different tools out there that suit all different types of needs and people's wants and all that stuff. And the whole important part is to have that all in one place so people can go learn about them and figure out which one's the right one for their table. We see it happen pretty often where people just kind of take the toolkit, set it down on the table, whether physically or metaphorically, and go, all right, my table's safe now. And I'm like, well, you just put a hammer on this like unbuilt table, and you haven't done anything with it, and now you're trying to use it. That doesn't work here. What you have to do is you have to look at the fact that every group and situation that you're going to be in is unique, and you need to figure out what's going to work best for y'all. And having as many options as possible for potential systems and supports and all that stuff is really important. But what's most important is like looking at what everyone needs and finding ways to work with that. Because a lot of people, like, when you were bringing up the question of like, what is the great starting point? A lot of people are like, which tool should I use? I'm like, I don't know. I'm not at your table. I'm not playing your game. I have no idea what your table's like and what you would need. You need to figure that out for yourself. And sometimes those things will change over time. Boundaries and consent and what people need to be okay will change. I see this happen pretty often, actually, with a friend of mine who became new parents while they've been gaming, where things that were okay with them before they had a kid, such as harm coming to children, are suddenly not really okay going forward. And so knowing that one solution does not fit everybody, and those solutions can and should change over time, and you should be having those conversations to make sure that everyone's needs are still being met, is really important. So I think that's an overarching thing that I wanted to kind of spin off of the X and O cards work really well for some people and doesn't work well for other people, and that's totally cool as long as everyone at the table agrees to what's going on and what they're using, and that everyone's needs are being met.
Yeah.
And
And all of these, the different tools that you've mentioned, are they all in the safety toolkit or explained in the safety toolkit that people can check out?
All of them are in there. So basically, there's a quick reference guide, which we wrote, which gives a really quick, easy explanation of some of these tools and how to use them. And then we also have a whole other section folder of other resources people have given us permission to put in there. So like source documents and the such for people to read more extensively on different tools and the such. Again, there's a reason why it's called the toolkit. It's meant to give you all these different tools, but the actual work of building that safe space and safe environment for playing games is on you to do. And we can't do that for you.
Yeah, for sure. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, absolutely. So with the last bit of time we have, I kind of want to shift gears a little bit into streaming. So I'm just wondering how all of this works when you're live in front of an audience. Does that look differently? How do you deal with safety between your players and the audience even?
Formulating that in my head.
Sure, that's fine. Yeah.
So I think this is, in my experience, where that kind of like anonymity between audience and players is really important. That's where, private chats in, whatever video conferencing software you're using, it gets super important, because if you're uncomfortable with something and you don't want to tell the whole world, hey, I'm uncomfortable. Because one of the downfalls of mid-play tools is that it puts the onus of saying something's wrong on the person who is uncomfortable in most cases. And that can be even worse when you're playing a game more performatively for an audience. So having a space where just the players can talk, or you can just talk to the GM, becomes really, really important, because the audience is there to watch, but you're the ones playing the game, and they don't really need to know everything that's going on if they're not comfortable, kind of playing the X card or something else. I say the X card because that, for me, is the one I have the most trouble using, especially in a stream, because it makes me feel like I'm a party pooper. And especially when everybody's watching and everybody's having a good time and the chat is laughing and you're like, but I'm not having a good time. And it's important that that the people playing this game know that I'm having a good time. But the internet is the internet, and what happens if somebody is gonna somebody who's not involved in the game is gonna come back at me for it. So that's why that's really important. Yeah, I kind of lost my train of thought. So Kienna.
Yeah, sure. I'll hop in here. So streaming adds another level of pressure. So before, where you're just playing a game with other people who are also participating at about the same level as you are, you're now playing with a whole nother participant at the table who are just there to watch. Well, I say just there to watch. I did a whole thesis on this. They are interacting with you in a different level, which still has an impact on you because you are then have an extra pressure of performativity because you have to act. You feel like you have to act a certain way or act to a certain degree of good, quote unquote. If you're watching chat and you're reading chat, that's also another level of pressure where sometimes chat may be going across on a certain tangent or on a certain you should go do this, and that also adds in the pressure. And so it becomes extremely important to do safety and consent, and it's extremely important as well to figure out what role does everybody play at the table. Again, going back to that social contract. What role does the audience play in our game and the story we're building here? Sometimes it might just be, they exist. We know they exist. We know we're doing this for the entertainment, but anything content-wise is all us. We're the only ones who are adding content. Therefore, we're really only the ones who are considering each other's care at this point, because an audience member can leave and, that's not going to be a big disruptive thing. But we can't just suddenly up and leave without being a big disruptive thing. And so needing to figure out how do you get over the performativity barrier, this feeling of, I need to be performative and therefore I need to not disrupt what's going on and therefore I'm not going to bring up when I'm uncomfortable. So you need to kind of figure out how do you get over that. Again, safety tools are really important, an easy way of doing that, and using chat and all that stuff. And then also figuring out, if they are impacting stuff, for example, donation incentives to add things into the story, hey, you can donate and you can give a player a nat 20, or you can give a player a nat 1, which honestly really sucks. And so you have to kind of, again, have consent from the rest of the people at the table to go, are you okay with sometimes you're going to get piled on with a bunch of nat 1s that are going to have to be used? Is that something you're cool with? If they're not, don't put that in. Don't put that possibility in. So you have to kind of build in that whole other section of care and safety, and it's another level of complication, but it's really important. And personally speaking, I think it's really important to be explicit that you are using safety tools or whatever else at the table, even if you're not showing it to the audience. So telling the audience, hey, we use these tools in the background, and we're keeping each other safe. I think that's really important for normalizing safety in gaming and these types of systems and tools. And it does kind of show to the audience, hey, we care for each other and we are helping each other through this. And then sometimes you can extend those safety things to the audience. I have streamed Bluebeard's Bride before. Again, which is a very intensive game. And I always say at the top of the stream that this is not going to be everyone's cup of tea to watch, and that's okay. If you need to leave to go watch something else, or you just don't want to be watching this anymore, I'm not going to take it as a personal thing, because I want you to be okay as an audience member as well, to be consenting to what they're watching and have that no pressure out if they need to. So yeah, that's kind of, and again, I started this whole project started with a guide to how to use safety tools in streaming, and it's just another. The more you add pressures and barriers, the more important it becomes to figure out how do you care for each other, even throughout all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, this was so informative, and I'm really excited to dive into this tool, the toolkit that you've created, and I hope everyone else has an opportunity to take a look at that. Thank you both so much for joining us and sharing all of this wealth of knowledge with us and keeping our community safer. Do you want to just quickly say where folks can find out more about each of you, if they want to follow you on Twitter or something like that?
Yeah, sure. Y'all can find me over on Twitter at Kienna S. That's where you figure I'm doing a lot of stuff. If you want to keep up with the toolkit, we do have a hashtag, TTRPG Safety Toolkit, on Twitter, where that's what we usually tag our stuff when it comes to toolkit stuff, especially when we update things. The toolkit is a living resource. It is constantly evolving and changing, and so things will get updated and added to it. So that's really important. We do have a Twitter account for the toolkit. It's still in the works right now. We're still kind of curating what that looks like. But yeah, that's where you can find me. What about you, Lauren?
Yeah, you can find me at JL_NiceGirl on Twitter. I do other stuff on the internet, other places. I stream things on my channel and different channels, but Twitter is the kind of best place to find that. And if you are interested in hearing Kienna and I talk more about safety and some of the issues surrounding safety, one of the things that the Safety Toolkit does have is audio of panels that we've done at past conventions. Right now, there is one that's like a very Safety Tools 101 level. It was done at my local convention that just started using safety tools. And so it's like a really good base for if you've never heard of a safety tool before. And then one we did at PAX Unplugged this year about fostering a culture of care and trust at the table, and the reasons why people might not use a safety tool at the table, even if it's available.
Awesome. That sounds so useful for, I think, a lot of folks who are just getting into this space. Thanks so much for creating this thing and doing that work. I think it means a lot to people. And yeah, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much.
And thank you to all of you at home for tuning in and checking out this episode of Good Tips for Hard Times. Shout out to our mods for helping to keep this space safe, because I think safety is important in all kinds of different communities that we're involved in. And if you want to watch video of this episode or any of our other episodes, you can do that at our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/gameshotline. As I said at the top of the show, the hotline is almost here. It's an emotional support hotline for folks who make and play games, and we will be open from Monday through Friday from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. Pacific. If you follow us on all of our social media, you'll get that announcement as soon as it goes up, and we would love it if you would share the word within your communities as well. If you want to help us keep that resource free, you can do that at gameshotline.org/donate and chipping in a few bucks. So thanks again for tuning in. You can join me next week when we'll talk to Ellen Powell about what comprehensive inclusion and accountability can look like in the tech world. Thanks, everyone. Bye.